Hey guys, tonight we dive into a time when soccer wasn't about sleek uniforms, precise passes, or billion-dollar stadiums filled with roaring fans. No, tonight we're taking a gentle stroll, or perhaps more accurately a careful dodge, through medieval streets filled with screaming villagers, flying elbows and muddy chaos. Picture yourself there. Crowded alleyways filled with frantic players, bodies tumbling, hands desperately grasping for a ball that might have been a pig's bladder just that morning. This wasn't the soccer of today. It was rough, raw, and occasionally ruthless. Honestly, if you think today's games are intense, trust me, you probably wouldn't have survived a medieval match. So before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey. Together, here on Timeless Sleep. You find yourself standing on a chilly, fog-covered medieval street, barely lit by the weak flicker of a few torches. Dawn is breaking, but the pale sun struggles to pierce through the dense, smoky haze drifting lazily from hearths and bakeries. The streets are muddy, the air pungent with smells you'd rather not identify, and the distant shouts of villagers already fill the air. Today is no ordinary day. It's the day of the annual village ball game. Of course, to call it a game is generous. It's more of an event, a communal chaos with hints of competition. There's no neatly drawn pitch, no carefully defined goalposts, no referees blowing whistles, and certainly no rules printed in tidy little books. Instead, there's just one large, crude ball, often stitched from leather scraps, and hordes of eager, aggressive villagers, all clamouring to kick, punch, and carry it towards some distant, vaguely defined goal. It might be the church door at one end of town, a riverbank on the other side, or even the entry to a local tavern. Frankly, the destination isn't terribly important. The journey is the thing, and it promises to be brutal. You shuffle to the side, narrowly avoiding a barefoot boy sprinting wildly toward the gathering crowd. His excitement is contagious, as is his recklessness. Nearby, burly men flex muscles with exaggerated bravado, casting sidelong glances at rival villagers. This isn't just sport, it's personal. Long-standing feuds between families, villages, and even guilds will find a place on this muddy battlefield. A farmer who lost his best cow to his neighbour's negligence might find solace kicking the ball into the offender's face, or at least that's his hope. In fact, ball games like this often functioned as a kind of controlled or uncontrolled community catharsis. For a few precious hours, the rules of polite society melted away. Peasants could shove past their landlords, tradesmen could tackle unruly customers, and apprentices could freely grapple with the strict masters who disciplined them all week. Historians still argue whether these games were purely entertainment, a sanctioned form of community violence, or perhaps a cunning social strategy, a medieval way to diffuse tensions and prevent outright rebellion. Suddenly a cheer erupts from the crowd. You crane your neck to see what's causing the excitement, and there it is, the ball, or at least what passes for one. Large, heavy, and unevenly shaped, it tumbles through the air trailing bits of loose leather. It's tossed by the local blacksmith, who proudly announces that it's been freshly stitched and stuffed for the occasion. You suppress a wince as you recall that medieval balls were often filled with animal hair, straw, or even dried peas, which sounds delightful, until the leather splits open mid-match, sending its contents flying everywhere and blinding players with bits of debris. The crowd surges forward, and you instinctively step back, pressing yourself against the rough stone wall of a nearby cottage. Players rush past, a wave of muddy, yelling humanity. You watch, wide-eyed, as elbows collide, legs tangle, and grown adults push each other aside with abandon. Rules, it seems, are utterly non-existent, or at least incredibly flexible. If you can't reach the ball, no problem. just tackle someone who can. No referee blows a whistle, no flags are raised. Justice is served swiftly and informally by whichever player has the strongest grip, fastest legs, or sharpest elbows. Of course, the absence of clear rules didn't mean these games lacked tradition or ritual. On the contrary, medieval ball games were deeply interwoven with local customs, feast days, and religious celebrations. Villagers often scheduled these chaotic matches around important calendar days, making them a treasured, if disorderly, part of community life. In some towns, the local priest would bless the ball before play began, perhaps hoping divine intervention would curb the violence. Spoiler alert, it rarely did. You watch the village priest now, standing safely on the sidelines, shaking his head in mild despair. He knows well that his sermon tomorrow will be preached to a bruised and battered congregation. Yet despite his frustration, even he understands that these games hold an essential, if mysterious, place in village life. They're rough, they're violent, but they're beloved. A loud crash brings your attention sharply back to the action. A wooden cart left carelessly in the street is overturned, spilling cabbages everywhere, crushed instantly beneath dozens of muddy feet. The merchant shouts in fury, but his anger is drowned out by joyous laughter. This isn't malicious, you realise. It's pure exhilaration, a collective madness that grips everyone involved. You almost envy their unrestrained joy, their complete abandonment of worry or restraint. It's impossible to be cautious or careful here, and perhaps that's part of the charm. In a world defined by strict social hierarchies and harsh realities, these few precious hours of chaos provide villagers with rare freedom. Even as the morning progresses, you notice spectators wandering onto the makeshift field, blurring the line between participant and observer. The temptation to join is strong. You feel the tug yourself. The sudden urge to leap into the fray, to kick and shout, to be part of something wild and uncontrolled. Instead, you remain safely on the sidelines, content for now to witness the madness unfolding before you. After all, the bruises these villagers proudly sport tomorrow are earned, medals of honour from a match bravely played. You, on the other hand, will wait comfortably without swollen ankles or cracked ribs. Perhaps the most astonishing thing about this chaotic medieval soccer match is how little anyone minds the inevitable injuries or damages. Scrapes and cuts are worn proudly, shared stories to bond over during the next ale drinking session. Broken fences and overturned carts become funny anecdotes, recounted fondly for weeks afterward. As the frenzy peaks, you watch the ball sail overhead, disappearing momentarily into the smoky mist. Players freeze, eyes squinting upward. In that suspended moment you realise that despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, there's genuine beauty here, a fleeting sense of unity, joy and freedom that's hard to replicate elsewhere. Then the ball plummets back into sight, the crowd roars again, and the chaos resumes. Welcome, friend, to medieval soccer. Hold tight, you're in for quite the night. A sudden burst of laughter echoes down the alley, mingling with cries of excitement and shock. You crane your neck, leaning a little closer to catch a glimpse and quickly discover the source of the chaos. The ball has burst open mid-flight, showering players and bystanders alike with its less than pleasant contents. Because as you now recall with a slight cringe, medieval soccer balls weren't made from carefully tested synthetic materials or neatly stitched leather. No, they were often fashioned directly from the bladder of an animal, usually a pig or even a sheep. If you're thinking, oh, how quaint, pause a moment to imagine playing a high-intensity sport with a literal animal bladder. First, picture the smell. These weren't precisely sanitized items, lovingly prepared in sterile workshops. They were hastily cleaned, if cleaned at all, and stitched together with crude threads. A medieval soccer match carried an aroma as memorable as it was pungent, a blend of farmyard, sweat, mud, and whatever else might have been lying around the field. Yet despite their less-than-ideal materials, medieval soccer balls weren't exactly disposable commodities. A village might have just one ball prepared for a special occasion, carefully preserved, anxiously inspected, and proudly displayed in the local tavern or market square before the game began. Losing the ball, or worse, destroying it, was a minor catastrophe. If a ball split or burst open prematurely, the game was usually halted temporarily as players scrambled to patch it together with whatever they had handy. Scraps of cloth, rope, twine, even handfuls of straw could serve as emergency repair materials. The result was often a lumpy, misshapen lump that somehow made the chaotic play even more unpredictable. Of course, the unpredictability of medieval balls wasn't their only downside. Because these balls were inflated with air directly blown by mouth, yes, directly from human lungs, no pumps or compressors here, their size, shape, and firmness could vary wildly from match to match. One game might feature a taut, firm bladder ideal for kicking, while the next match's ball could be saggy, floppy, or dangerously inflated, liable to burst at the slightest kick. This variability meant that medieval players had to be versatile, adaptable, and very forgiving of sudden changes. Skilled players weren't just those who kick the ball hardest or farthest. They were the ones who could swiftly adapt when a ball suddenly deflated mid-match, or who could anticipate the ball's erratic bounce when it collided with uneven cobblestones or thick mud. In fact, medieval soccer matches sometimes took place across entire villages or towns, transforming familiar streets and fields into chaotic, shifting battlefields. The lack of clearly defined boundaries or consistent playing surfaces meant that each match was a unique, unpredictable challenge. One moment you'd be sprinting down a dusty lane, carefully balancing the slippery, shifting bladder. The next moment, you'd find yourself waist-deep in a ditch or tangled among livestock, desperately trying to retrieve the ball before your rivals did. As the chaos continues, you see an older man limping from the action, his ankle swollen from an awkward collision. He waves off help, determined to remain proud in defeat. Medieval soccer was not a game for the faint-hearted, or for anyone especially fond of their limbs. Sprained ankles, broken toes, and bruised shins were badges of honour, proudly displayed and boasted about in the tavern later that night. Watching the chaos, you might think medieval soccer seems almost deliberately unpleasant, yet the participants' enthusiasm is unmistakable, and their joy is genuine. Why, you wonder, were medieval villagers so deeply committed to a game with such obvious drawbacks? Perhaps the appeal lay precisely in its unpredictability, its raw, visceral excitement, and its capacity to let ordinary people briefly escape their harsh, regulated lives. Indeed, medieval society was rigidly structured, with limited opportunities for leisure or play. Villagers spent their days labouring in fields, workshops and marketplaces, bound by strict social expectations and heavy responsibilities. The rare occasions when they could abandon their burdens and engage in carefree if slightly reckless games provided invaluable emotional release. It was a chance to let loose, to laugh, scream, and forget their hardships, if only for a short time. As if to emphasise this point, another roar erupts from the crowd, and a cluster of players tumbles across the ground, wrestling for control of the now decidedly filthy ball. The villagers cheer wildly, urging them on. For this moment, worries about failed harvests, debts, taxes and disease fade into the background. All that matters is the next kick, the next scramble, the next thrilling, unpredictable bounce. You find yourself smiling despite, or perhaps because of, the sheer absurdity unfolding around you. It's difficult not to be charmed by the raw enthusiasm, determination, and joy of the players and spectators alike. Medieval soccer might have been messy, smelly, and borderline dangerous, but it clearly had a special, irreplaceable place in the hearts of those who played it. It's easy, from your modern perspective, to chuckle at the chaotic, somewhat ridiculous spectacle of medieval soccer. But perhaps we shouldn't judge it too harshly. After all, even today's sleek, polished matches retain hints of their wild, untamed ancestors. Every controversial tackle, every unpredictable bounce, every frustrated player arguing with a referee recalls those medieval days when rules barely existed, and the game itself was an ongoing improvisation. Tonight, As you watch the last rays of evening sun illuminate the players' muddy faces, you sense the lingering spirit of medieval soccer. It's there in the laughter, the chaos, the occasional burst bladder, and the irrepressible human desire to chase a ball, no matter how strange or unpredictable. So next time you watch a modern soccer match, with perfectly inflated balls, clearly marked pitches and uniformed referees, spare a moment to remember its humble, chaotic beginnings. Recall those muddy medieval streets, those smelly pigs' bladders, and those enthusiastic villagers who braved injuries, mockery and outright disaster, simply because they loved to play. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel a twinge of nostalgia for a simpler, messier, far more unpredictable game. But for now, let's leave the players to their chaos and settle deeper into the comfort of your quiet room. Let the echoes of laughter, shouting, and wild cheers gently fade into silence. Close your eyes, let the image of a medieval street dissolve softly into dreams and drift peacefully away from the chaos, at least until the next whistle blows. The shouts and laughter ricochet off timbered walls and you realise the bedlam has only just begun. If you're hoping for a quiet, orderly match, you're in the wrong millennium. Here in medieval soccer, the concept of rules is at best a rumour, at worst the punchline to a dark village joke. You linger near the edge of the fray, watching as the game swings from one street to another, its course dictated less by strategy and more by the moods and grudges of its players. No one explains the rules because, quite frankly, there aren't any, at least not ones anyone agrees on. A tall, red-faced baker from the east side is arguing that you can't use your hands, but a group of apprentices from the tannery have already tackled the ball, clutching it tight and running like their hair's on fire. The crowd erupts in a mixture of cheers and jeers. The baker is howling in protest, but his objections are drowned out by the general consensus. If you can get away with it, it's probably legal. There's a certain lawlessness to the play that's as exhilarating as it is confusing. Sometimes two teams are declared at the start, maybe North Side against South Side, or one parish against another. Sometimes the only sides are everyone versus that one poor guy with the ball. The ball itself is an agent of chaos, bouncing off windows, rolling into animal troughs, occasionally vanishing under a pile of bodies only to reappear in the arms of a grinning child. Every now and then, a local elder tries to intervene, waving a stick and shouting about proper conduct or fair play. He is without fail ignored. Instead, the game veers down an alley, players leaping fences, dashing across muddy gardens, slipping on spilled ale outside the tavern. You spot a girl climbing up a rain barrel to toss the ball down to her brother, who promptly tries to make a break for the boundary, except the boundary is just wherever the mob can't reach him. One of the town's local legends involves a dispute so heated that it carried on into the night, with villagers using torches to keep the game going. When two players claimed to have scored the winning goal at the same moment, the only solution was a best-of-3 wrestling match, which ended when both were too tired to stand. Nobody remembers who actually won, but everyone remembers the bruises and laughter. There's a particular giddiness in the air when the ball is lost. 1 minute it's in play, the next it's vanished. Maybe into a bakery, maybe into the river, maybe in the jaws of an overexcited dog who thinks he's just joined the fun. Retrieval efforts are heroic, with players squeezing through hedges or bribing the dog with scraps of meat. When the ball returns, there's always a moment of collective celebration, the briefest pause before the chaos resumes. As you edge down a narrow lane, a group of boys have started their own side game, hurling the ball over a low wall and daring each other to dash after it before the grown-ups can catch them. They're inventing their own rules as they go. If the ball lands in the goose pen, double points. If the geese attack, automatic victory. You stifle a laugh, realizing that these impromptu rules, created and forgotten in the same breath, are every bit as binding as the so-called official guidelines of the adult's game. If you're waiting for someone in a striped shirt with a whistle to call a foul, don't hold your breath. The only referees here are whoever shouts the loudest, and even then, their verdicts are rarely accepted. Arguments are frequent, but they're also half the fun. a chance to shout, tease, and sometimes to sneak a quick breather while everyone else is distracted. One elderly woman perched on her stoop calls out reminders of how things used to be. "In my day, you had to get the ball past the smithy to win." The children respond by declaring that the new rule is to keep the ball away from the smithy at all costs. Within minutes, someone is inevitably kicked into a puddle, and a new dispute erupts. You marvel at the way the game seems to rewrite itself, adapting to the landscape, the weather, even the mood of the crowd. Amid the chaos, a pig wanders through, sniffing curiously at a cluster of players sprawled in the dirt. Someone shouts, "No pigs on the pitch," and for a fleeting second there's order, but just as quickly the pig is adopted as an unofficial mascot, paraded around with much cheering and a makeshift wreath of dandelions around its neck. The game pauses, just long enough for the players to share a joke about how the pig might play better than some of the villagers. You get the sense that in medieval soccer, laughter is as important as scoring. When someone does finally score, kicking or carrying the ball through an agreed-upon gate, doorway or patch of mud, there's jubilation, but also debate. Did the ball really cross the line? Was that handball, or just an accidental nudge? Should the game end here or start anew? The crowd rarely agrees, and so the play continues, reshaping itself around the collective will of those still standing. There's an odd democracy to it all, a sense that anyone, young or old, can shape the outcome of the match. The rules are as much social as they are practical. An especially clever player might curry favour with the spectators. "Did you see how I dodged old Margaret's goose?" While another is gently reminded that last year you promised not to trip the priest again. It's a sport, yes, but also a rolling village meeting, a festive negotiation, and sometimes a test of who can shout the loudest. Yet for all the madness, you realise there's a rhythm to the game, a heartbeat beneath the chaos. People know when things have gone too far, a broken window, a sprained wrist, a sudden outbreak of real anger. In those moments, there's a pause, a hush, and then a collective decision to cool things down. Someone brings out a jug of ale, another tells a story about the time old Tom lost the ball on the roof, and gradually laughter returns. The game resumes, not because anyone enforces the rules, but because everyone wants to keep playing. At the heart of it all, you sense a profound truth. Medieval soccer is a mirror of village life, with all its quarrels, improvisations, alliances, and reconciliations. It's messy, unpredictable, and occasionally a little dangerous, but it's also a celebration, a reminder that, in the end, what matters isn't the rules but the joy of the game, the connection with your neighbours, and the sheer thrill of joining in something wild and communal. So you linger a little longer on the edge of the muddy pitch, breathing in the sharp air, listening to the squabble and laughter, and realising that, in this game, every participant is also a creator. The rules are unwritten, the goals uncertain, but the spirit is timeless. And if you wake tomorrow with a bruise or two, or find a clump of mud in your shoe, you'll know you were part of something, however fleeting, however chaotic, that made you feel alive. The uproar is still ringing in your ears when, above the melee, you hear the sharp clip of hoofs and the unmistakable clatter of armoured boots on cobblestone. Suddenly, the mood shifts. Eyes dart nervously toward the end of the street where a group of official-looking men appear. Town bailiffs in sombre tunics, accompanied by a grim-faced messenger holding a parchment aloft. You sense a wave of caution sweep the crowd, for in the long and tangled history of medieval soccer, nothing disrupts the game quite like the arrival of the law. This time, the parchment is stamped with the seal of the local lord. He's declared, yet again, that all ball games in the village streets are hereby forbidden upon pain of fine, imprisonment, or worse. The reason is always the same. These matches are considered a threat to the king's peace, the town's business, and, perhaps most importantly, the local windows, carts and shins. Sometimes the ban is cloaked in language about protecting the good order of the realm, but everyone knows it's really about controlling the chaos. You can almost hear the collective sigh from the villagers, and you notice something curious. No one stops playing. Instead, the mood becomes sly, conspiratorial. A quick nod from the blacksmith, a sly grin from the alewife, and the ball is tucked discreetly beneath a cloak. The bailiffs, for their part, don't look eager to get involved. They stand awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, trying to appear stern but obviously keen not to take a stray ball to the nose. You realise that, for as long as there have been rowdy games, there have been authorities desperate to stop them. In medieval England, records show dozens of royal decrees, edicts, and proclamations against ball games. Edward II, back in 1314, famously issued a ban on football in London, grumbling that great noise and many evils arose from such disorderly gatherings. A few decades later, Edward III repeated the warning, calling for the suppression of football and handball and other such idle games. Why? Because, according to his anxious ministers, ball games distracted the populace from their archery practice, a vital skill for national defence in a country perpetually at war. This tradition of banning soccer was hardly limited to England. Throughout medieval Europe, authorities fretted about the unruly spirit of ball games. In France, local lords and city councils routinely issued proclamations against la soule, their own chaotic version of football, while in Florence, magistrates wrung their hands over Calico Fiorentino, worried the games would spill over into riots and criminal mischief. Of course, as you stand among these villages, it's clear the royal bans are mostly words, sometimes ignored, often mocked, rarely enforced with real enthusiasm. If anything, the attempts at prohibition have given the games an aura of mischief, a sense that playing is a kind of rebellious act. It's a badge of honour to have your ball confiscated by the bailiff, even better if you manage to steal it back later. You spot the village priest sidling over to the town constable, murmuring something about the youth needing wholesome exercise. The constable shrugs and looks the other way. Everyone in the crowd knows the bans are mostly for show. If the game gets out of hand, there will be a fine or two, but rarely anything worse. Still, the threat hangs in the air, and it adds a delicious thrill to the proceedings. You feel it as the ball is suddenly back in play, tossed behind a row of barrels as the bailiffs pretend not to notice. The game splits, with one group chasing the ball through the back gardens, while another keeps up a decoy ruckus in the main street, waving their arms and shouting to draw attention away from the real action. It's not just the threat of punishment that makes the game more thrilling. It's the knowledge that, for a brief moment, ordinary villagers can flout the rules of both the game and the world around them. The son of a poor farmer can sprint past the lord's men and score a goal. The shy apprentice can tackle the swaggering town bully without fear of real reprisal. The game is a strange kind of social equalizer, a place where hierarchies wobble, if not topple altogether. A merchant's wife, her hands dusted with flour, laughs as her son darts past a startled scribe. "Mind my pies!" she shouts, but you can tell she's rooting for him. These fleeting moments, when the whole village teeters on the edge of order and disorder, are what people remember long after the bruises heal. You overhear a story about a match last year, when the town reeve tried to confiscate the ball and ended up accidentally scoring the winning goal for the rival team. It's been the subject of countless retellings in the alehouse ever since, growing a little more outlandish with every round of drinks. Tonight the reeve scowls good-naturedly when the tale is told, but you suspect he's secretly proud to be remembered as part of the spectacle. Some towns embrace the chaos more openly than others. There are places where the authorities simply give up, setting aside special feast days for soccer and letting the wildness run its course. In these villages, the ball game becomes an official holiday, a time when the rules are temporarily suspended and anything goes, so long as the bakery is left standing and the priest's robes remain mostly unsoiled. Other places take a harder line. There are records of men being fined, put in the stocks, or even exiled for their part in especially violent matches. Yet these punishments, when enforced, do little to dampen the passion for the game. If anything, they become part of the folklore. Every village has its stories of the football martyrs, players who suffered for the love of the game. A boy who took a beating from the constable becomes a hero. The man who spent a night in the stocks for refusing to give up the ball becomes a legend. It's not just the physical game that's at stake, it's a kind of spiritual contest, a test of will against authority. When the bans are lifted, or the law turns a blind eye, the celebration is especially fierce. Ale flows freely, musicians appear seemingly out of nowhere, and the matches last longer, rougher and louder. Even those who don't play get swept up in the revelry, cheering on friends and rivals with equal gusto. You watch as the match regains its momentum, the earlier threat of punishment now nothing but another layer of excitement. A boy, not more than 10, manages to dodge a line of adults and nearly scores, only to be scooped up by his older sister who carries him giggling back to the sidelines. Another player, an elderly man with a crooked cane, is greeted with thunderous applause when he manages a particularly artful kick, sending the ball arcing over the heads of 3 much younger men. Jokes and running commentary echo across the field. Careful, that's the same kick that knocked out old Harold's tooth last year. Keep it low or you'll hit the smith's cat. The ball, battered but still holding together, careens down a side alley, pursued by a jumble of players and for good measure the village dog. You spot a group of children acting as unofficial scouts, racing ahead to alert the players if the bailiff is coming, or if an especially grumpy merchant is about to emerge from his shop. Their efforts are rewarded with raucous cheers and later with sweet buns filched from the baker's stall. At one point the ball rolls dangerously close to the churchyard and for a heartbeat everyone pauses. The priest steps forward, arms folded, eyebrows raised. The tension is palpable. Then, with a twinkle in his eye, he stoops and kicks the ball back into play. The crowd erupts in applause and the match resumes with even more vigour. There's a sense of collective relief, a reminder that, for all the talk of bans and punishments, sometimes even the guardians of order just want to see a good game. There are towns, you hear, where the ban is taken far more seriously, where matches are broken up by force, where balls are confiscated and burned, and where ringleaders are dragged before stern-faced councils. In these places, ball games become a kind of secret society, passed down from older players to eager apprentices in whispered meetings behind the smithy or in shadowy corners of the alehouse. One old-timer tells you about a year when the village went without a ball game, when the threat of fines was just too much, and no one dared to play. It was, he says, the dullest spring I can remember. No laughter in the streets, no stories of last-minute goals or spectacular tackles, no fresh gossip or new village legends. It's not just the game, he tells you quietly, it's what comes with it. Even the bailiffs, you suspect, know this truth. After all, a peaceful, orderly village is all well and good, but a little chaos every now and then keeps things interesting. You notice too that the game has a kind of rhythm. It surges and ebbs, sometimes boiling over into near mayhem, sometimes calming as if by unspoken agreement. When a player goes down hard, hands reach out to help him up. When tempers flare, someone steps in with a joke or a story. The sense of community is as strong as the spirit of competition, and the game itself becomes a living thing. Sometimes wild, sometimes gentle, always alive. As dusk settles, lanterns are lit around the village square, casting golden light across the muddy field. Shadows dance across the faces of players and spectators alike, their smiles broad, their eyes bright. Even the bailiffs, who earlier stood stiff and disapproving, now watch with softened expressions, their arms folded but their feet tapping in time with the rhythm of the game. You find yourself thinking that, in a world so full of rules, boundaries and punishments, there's something magical about a game that refuses to be tamed. Medieval soccer is more than just a pastime. It's a celebration of chaos, community and the indomitable human spirit. And as the match stretches long into the night, you can't help but hope the ball never stops rolling. The village square is thick with dusk now, lantern-light glimmering against slick cobbles, but the game is far from over. If anything, it's only growing more intense. The players' shouts sharper, and the tackles a little harder. You edge along the boundary, close enough to feel the excitement and a hint of fear. A tangle of exhilaration you realise is the very spirit of medieval soccer. For in this sport, bruises and scraped knuckles are not an accident but almost a rite of passage. A cheer goes up as the ball, still miraculously holding together, ricochets off a wooden post and straight into a scrum of bodies. Elbows and knees fly. A shoeless youth launches himself at the mass, while a burly brewer attempts a clever feint, sending two rivals sprawling face first into the mud. In the wild swirl of bodies, it's impossible to tell friend from foe. It's every man, woman and bold child for themselves. You witness a tanner, broad-shouldered and perpetually scowling, execute a tackle that would be banned in any modern match. His victim, a carpenter, goes down hard, rolling to his feet with a grin, shaking mud from his ears. The crowd whoops. It's not an uncommon sight. In fact, violence and rough play are not just tolerated, but expected. There are no yellow cards, no stern lectures from referees, only the code of the crowd who cheer for audacity and boo only the most egregious acts of cruelty. Injuries are frequent and sometimes severe. One moment a nimble girl vaults over a fallen opponent. The next, a village elder limps off the field, wincing and muttering about the good old days when bones were stronger. It's understood that if you step onto this makeshift pitch, you accept the risks, just as you accept the likely aches and stories you'll carry home tonight. You can't help but marvel at the stamina on display. Some players stagger, clutching bruised ribs or rubbing skinned shins, but they refuse to quit. If anything, the pain only fuels their resolve. A woman in a patched green gown wipes blood from her knuckles, ties her hair tighter, and dives right back into the fray, grinning like a devil. Later, you'll hear how she broke up a brawl last year by simply threatening to eat the ball, and she looked like she meant it too. But while the brutality is undeniable, so too is the sense of camaraderie that runs beneath the chaos. Players are quick to help each other up, unless, of course, they're in the middle of a grudge. It's not uncommon for heated rivals to share a flask of ale at the sidelines, laughing off bumps and bruises that would send a modern player to the physio for a week. Historians still argue whether this blood and mud spectacle was a true sport, or just an excuse for villagers to vent their frustrations. There's evidence both ways. Some records speak of games degenerating into outright brawls, running feuds settled in the mud, noses bloodied, and teeth lost to the melee. But just as often, chroniclers describe post-game feasts, wounds compared like trophies, and new friendships sealed with a handshake and a shared loaf of bread. You remember an old tale you heard whispered at the market, of a legendary match that ended with half, the village limping, 3 doors broken, and one player returning home with his shirt missing and a goose following him. That same night, the entire village gathered around a bonfire, laughing at their injuries and telling stories long into the night. Better a bruised shin than a bruised heart, they'd say, and you can see now what they mean. These games are as much about belonging as about winning. Still, the physical risk is very real. One particularly fierce tackle ends with a collective gasp as a young smith is left clutching his leg, teeth gritted in pain. The game halts. No matter how wild the play, true injury draws a line. The crowd closes in, offering homemade remedies. A splash of ale here, a sprig of something foul-smelling there. The local wise woman inspects the injury and declares it just a twist. He'll limp, but he'll live. Relieved, the villagers let the game resume a little more cautiously for a minute or two. Yet the pause is fleeting. As the game wears on, the darkness deepens and torches are lit, casting monstrous shadows that dance along the walls. The violence ramps up, not out of malice, but necessity. In this light, a missed tackle can be forgiven, but a half-hearted effort will draw jeers. There's a raw honesty here. You can't fake your way through a medieval ball game. The next scrum ends in a heap of groaning, laughing players. Someone somehow manages to retain possession of the battered ball, and the chase begins anew. Watching from the safety of the sidelines, you realise how quickly fortunes can change. A hero 1 minute trampled the next. A clever kick, a lucky bounce, and suddenly the game is on the brink of victory or defeat. You wonder how anyone survives this ritual, but survive they do. Mostly. The village midwife stands nearby, ready with a pouch of remedies for sprains, cuts, and the occasional dislocated finger. Someone jokes that she should keep a tally like the local inn does for spilled ale. 10 bruises, 3 black eyes, and only 2 lost shoes tonight must be a good match. The crowd laughs, and the game continues. One of the more memorable scenes plays out when a brawny miller, chased by half the field, accidentally careens into a stack of barrels outside the tavern. The barrels tumble, ale flows into the street, and a few bystanders are quick to save the precious liquid with cups and tankards. The game pauses just long enough for the miller to haul himself up and declare, "That's my secret strategy, distract 'em with a drink." It becomes the running joke of the night. Not all the violence is accidental. Sometimes tempers flare, especially when old grudges are at play. A pair of brothers, famous for their feuding, break into a wrestling match, rolling in the mud, fists flying. The villagers shout encouragement, but eventually the wise woman wades in and dumps a bucket of cold water on their heads. The fight dissolves into laughter, and grudgingly the brothers shake hands. In this world, even fights have a rhythm, and the game itself is the ultimate peacemaker. There's a ritual to the aftermath too. When the game finally ends, usually because the ball is irreparably destroyed, the darkness impenetrable, or the players simply too exhausted to continue, everyone gathers at the tavern or the central fire. Bumps and bruises are tended, stories exchanged, and the day's wildest moments become instant legends. Remember when the priest nutmegged the butcher? Did you see the baker's flying leap? No one will ever forget the time the ball got stuck in the mayor's beard. Some say that the true purpose of medieval soccer wasn't the match itself, but everything that came after. The laughter, the shared aches, the sense that for a few hours everyone belonged to something greater. Others whisper that it's a necessary release, a way to keep deeper resentments from bubbling over. Whatever the case, you can't deny the power of the ritual. Even those who didn't play, those who only watched from windows or doorways, carry home the thrill of the spectacle. As the crowd disperses, you see the battered ball, a miracle it lasted this long, proudly displayed on the tavern mantel, a symbol of courage and chaos alike. It will be replaced soon enough, but tonight it is a trophy. There's a peculiar comfort in this violence. Not the pain itself, but the way it's shared. For all its roughness, medieval soccer is never about cruelty. It's about testing limits, finding your place, and earning respect. It's about coming together, even if you leave with a limp or a scrape that will be the talk of the village for weeks. Tomorrow the bruises will be counted and the stories retold, each time a little bigger, a little funnier, a little more legendary. Someone will claim they scored the winning goal, someone else will insist the ball was out of bounds. The arguments will flare up in the marketplace, at the well, and especially at the tavern, but always with a twinkle in the eye and a fondness for the madness. Historians still debate how much these bruising matches shaped the community. Were they a release valve for village tensions, a bonding ritual, or simply a bit of welcome chaos in a hard and structured world? You suspect the answer is all three. After all, as you drift away from the fading glow of the torches, the laughter and distant aches still echoing, you can't help but feel a little braver, a little wilder, and just a bit more at home. And as you slip into sleep, you find yourself dreaming of mud-splattered faces, roaring crowds, and that battered, bouncing ball, forever rolling, forever inviting you back for one more impossible, glorious match. Lanterns flicker, casting tangled webs of light across the muddy ground. The night air is heavy with laughter, the last shouts of the day's contest echoing between timbered walls. You'd think, after all that bruising and brawling, the players would be ready to collapse, but no. There's one last ritual to fulfill, arguing, of course, over whether anyone actually won. The debate swirls around the most peculiar aspect of medieval soccer, the goals. In this world, forget about perfectly measured nets and gleaming white posts. Here, a goal might be anything solid, immovable, or simply agreed upon after a lengthy squabble. You watch a group of players animatedly gesturing toward the mossy stone door of the old church at the east end of the village. Wasn't that the goal this year? Or was it the battered oak gate by the tavern? The confusion is part of the fun. Half competition, half negotiation, a microcosm of village life itself. This year, the match started with 2 teams, loosely formed along family lines, but by now the sides have blurred. The original goals, so fiercely defended in the morning, have shifted like the boundaries of a childhood game. At some point, someone suggested that the stream at the bottom of the lane would do just as well for a target, and as you saw, the ball vanished into its cold waters more than once. You find yourself standing with a cluster of players by the old stone bridge, one foot in the marshy grass, the other on the cracked paving. Someone claims the final goal must be between the big rock and the chicken coop. Others argue that since the baker's dog stole the ball earlier, the goal should be anywhere the dog can't reach. These impromptu adjustments are not just tolerated, they're essential. If the game had strict, unchanging goals, it would lose its character, its wild flexibility. The villagers laugh as they recall past matches, each with its own infamous goal. One year, the target was the mayor's garden gate, which led to a scandal involving trampled carrots and a week-long ban on ball games. Another time, the blacksmith's newly painted door became the goal, until a well-aimed kick left a dent that is still visible today. There's a joke that in one town, the annual goalpost was the innkeeper's hat. No wonder he took to wearing a helmet. The goals in medieval soccer are always a moving target, literally and figuratively. Sometimes, a local landmark takes centre stage. A standing stone, a wayside cross, the door of a manor house, if the lord is away. Other times, the goal is simply over there, a vague sweep of the hand, and the game surges in that direction until someone objects. If a player scores by reaching a disputed point, the argument that follows is almost as important as the point itself. Did the ball cross the invisible line? Was the player offside even though no one can agree what offside even means? Historians still argue whether these shifting goals reflected deeper patterns in medieval village politics. Was it just disorganisation, or a clever way to make sure everyone, rich, poor, young, old, got a chance to decide what counted? Some say the goalpost moved to avoid breaking too many windows. Others believe it was about keeping the game unpredictable, letting it bend and flow with the personalities and power struggles of the day. Tonight, you witness the legacy of this tradition. The ball, battered but not yet beaten, is set at the centre of a makeshift pitch, a muddy triangle formed by the smithy, the tavern, and the church. The oldest player, known as Grandsire Tom, declares that the first team to touch the church door 3 times is the winner. The younger players groan. That's a long run for tired legs, but no one argues too hard. With a cheer, the match resumes. Everyone chasing, tumbling, laughing, and inevitably bickering over whether a touch requires a kick, a slap, or just a muddy handprint. As you watch, a gaggle of children changes the rules mid-game. You have to skip every 3rd step, shouts one. No hands, unless you're wearing a hat, says another. The adults roll their eyes, but secretly delight in the creativity. For the children, the very idea of a fixed goal is amusing. Their favourite challenge is inventing new ones every time the ball changes hands. If only all disputes in life could be solved with such easy inventiveness. But it isn't always light-hearted. Sometimes these ever-changing goals are a source of genuine tension. In bigger towns, rivalries between neighbourhoods flare into all-out war. Last year, you hear, a match between the east and west sides devolved into a running battle, the goals shifting so often that no one could say who won. The only certainty was a record number of bruises and a new ban on playing near the market square. It's not uncommon for arguments over goals to last longer than the match itself. After all, in a world without clocks or scoreboards, time is elastic and memory is unreliable. Some villagers claim to have scored 3 goals, others insist none were official. The local scribe, eager to practice his penmanship, starts jotting down the results, only to have his notes disputed by every player present. The end-of-game reckoning becomes a festival of debate, full of laughter, wild claims, and occasionally solemn oaths sworn on muddy boots. The pitch itself is just as unpredictable. The game might start in a village green, but it doesn't take long for the action to spill into alleys, backyards, and muddy ditches. At times, the ball vanishes into a chicken run, sending feathers flying. One memorable moment sees the blacksmith's pig join the fray, charging across the field with the ball jammed on its snout, refusing to give it up until bribed with half a turnip. You marvel at the resourcefulness of the players. If the ball goes missing, a replacement is fashioned from whatever is at hand. Bundled rags, an old cap, or, on one infamous occasion, a large cabbage. There's even a standing joke that the only thing more changeable than the medieval ball is the medieval goalpost. Some outsiders scoff at this lack of structure. "It's not a real game," says one passing merchant, shaking his head. "It's just an excuse for a brawl." But you know better. To the villagers, the fluid rules and shifting goals are the heart of the game. A way to keep things fair, fun, and endlessly surprising. They know, instinctively, that too many rules drain the life from play, that sometimes it's better to let the game decide what matters as it unfolds. You notice too the subtle negotiations that happen around the goals. A player about to score might hesitate, glancing to see if his rival's little brother is nearby. After all, no one wants to end the game on a sour note. Sometimes the crowd decides that a good story is worth more than a victory, and the best play is the one that gets the most laughs. As the match finally winds down, Grandsire Tom shuffles forward and slaps the church door with a muddy hand, earning a thunderous cheer. "That's 3, someone shouts. "Or was it 4? "Who's counting?" Tom replies to roars of laughter. The game ends not with a whistle, but with the crowd spilling onto the green, comparing bruises and replaying favourite moments in excruciating detail. And as you drift away from the firelit square, you understand something deeper. Medieval soccer isn't just a sport, it's a living story, constantly rewritten by those who play it. Every goalpost moved, every rule bent, every disputed victory is another thread in the fabric of village life, tying past and present together in a knot of shared memory and friendly argument. Tomorrow the debate will continue. Some will claim victory, others will insist the score was tied. But all will agree on one thing: it was a night to remember. And somewhere, in the darkness, the battered ball waits, ready to be chased across new fields and through new arguments, forever unpredictable, forever beloved. As the echoes of the match fade into the soft hum of the evening, you slip through the crowd, catching snatches of song and laughter drifting from the open tavern windows. The warmth inside spills out into the cool night, and you notice the crowd is a little different from what you expected. It isn't just men and boys boasting about bruises. There are women, girls, even a few grandmothers, all swapping stories of the match, sharing in the chaos as equals. The truth is, while the history books have often brushed women aside in many medieval villages, women played, and played hard. In fact, there's something especially compelling about the tales that linger in the air tonight. A red-cheeked miller's daughter, hair wild and skirt streaked with mud, is holding court by the fire, recounting her winning goal, her laughter as brash as any man's. A cobbler's wife rolls up her sleeve to show a bruised forearm, earned, she claims, by out-wrestling the smith's apprentice for control of the ball. The room erupts in applause. It's easy, from the distance of centuries, to believe the story that ball games like these were solely the domain of men, muscular, muddy, and loud. The old illustrations, after all, usually show wild-haired men locked in combat while women stand demurely by, clutching baskets or cheering from doorways. But step closer, and you'll find the records dotted with glimpses of women running, kicking, shouting, and sometimes even leading their teams to victory. The voices of chroniclers occasionally break through with a note of disapproval, bemoaning young maidens seen tumbling in the mud, losing all maidenly dignity. Yet, for every frown from the town elders, there are at least 3 stories from the people themselves. Proud tales of sisters, mothers and daughters whose speed and cunning made them legends in their own right. Tonight, as the ale flows and the stories spin ever taller, you can't help but wonder what drew women to this chaos. It isn't just a question of fun, though fun there is, in buckets. In a world where roles are set as rigidly as the stone foundations of the church, the ball game offers something deliciously subversive, a chance to break the pattern. For a few muddy, breathless hours, the rules of rank, gender and decorum fall away. On the field, a nimble girl can dodge a hulking farmhand and find herself cheered by the entire village. A widow who spends her days bent over washing tubs can, with a well-timed kick, become the star of the night. You recall the story of Marjorie, a baker's wife in a town not so different from this one. One Candlemas Day, the annual game was at its fiercest, the crowd thick with merchants and labourers, apprentices and town elders. Marjorie, stout and sharp-tongued, wasn't expected to play, at least not by the men who'd left her out of the teams. But when the ball rolled her way, she scooped it up, and to the roar of the market women sprinted for the goal. The men tried to block her, but she darted through, skirt flying, and planted the ball squarely on the steps of the church. That year, the town talked about Marjorie's goal longer than any other event. The chronicler's disapproval lingers on the page. A shameful spectacle, he wrote. But the villagers' laughter and Marjorie's own pride tell the real story. And if you ask around, every village seems to have a similar tale. The girl who outran her brothers, the mother who held the line against half the town, the grandmother whose strategic cunning left younger players bewildered. Historians still argue whether women's involvement was widespread or exceptional. Were these moments the norm or the glorious exception? The truth, as always, is probably tangled somewhere in between. There are regions, especially in the British Isles and northern France, where church records and local ordinances explicitly mention women's matches on feast days, sometimes even separate from the men's games. In other places, women joined in as part of the great communal melee. Sometimes encouraged, sometimes grudgingly tolerated, always noticed when they made a mark. For the most part, the rules, or lack thereof, offered room for anyone willing to brave the mud and the rough and tumble. Skill, after all, comes in many forms. Speed, agility, and sharp wits were just as valuable as brute strength. You watch as a girl, barefoot, hair streaming behind her, darts between two much larger men, flicks the ball sideways with her toe, and sprints away in a spray of mud. The crowd howls its approval, and you suspect she'll be a local legend before long. There's a certain slyness in how women sometimes bend the social rules even as they play the game. One young woman, pulled from the scrum with a torn sleeve and a triumphant grin, jokes to her friends, "I lost a sleeve, but I kept the ball." Later, as the feast begins, she's the first to be offered a cup of ale. Tribute to her prowess on the field. These moments are woven into the wider fabric of village life. On market days, the talk turns as often to memorable plays by daughters and wives as to the feats of sons and husbands. Grandmothers, thought too old to play, become sideline strategists, their shouts as fierce as any on the field. Girls gather in corners to practice kicks and feints, sometimes using bundles of rags, when a real ball is nowhere to be found. Sometimes the game becomes a kind of theatre for the entire village. Old women, who might spend the rest of the year in the background, take centre stage for a moment. Young lovers find excuses to accidentally collide, their courtship hidden in the jostle and the chase. The lines between spectator and player blur until everyone, even the most timid, is drawn into the wild energy. The occasional note of scorn or disapproval can't fully dampen this spirit. "It's not fitting," grumbles one elder, but his wife snaps back, "You're only jealous because I scored more goals." Laughter breaks the tension, and soon the old man is recounting his wife's glory days on the field, half in mock protest, half in pride. Some villages even have traditions that specifically celebrate women's play. On certain feast days, the field is handed over to the women, and the men line the sidelines, pretending to offer expert advice, but really just enjoying the spectacle. In one town, the annual Shrove Tuesday match is officially started by the oldest woman present, who tosses the ball high into the air and shouts, "Let the chaos begin!" She is treated as a guest of honour, her word law for the rest of the day. The practicalities of playing in long skirts and aprons don't seem to slow anyone down. If anything, the limitations become another layer of strategy. A cleverly wielded apron can block a ball or trip up an overconfident opponent. Mud stains and grass stains are badges of honour, shown off in the marketplace the next morning with laughter and a sense of pride. It's not all fun, of course. Just like the men, women risk bumps, bruises, and sometimes sharper injury. There are tales of sprained ankles, torn dresses, and even the occasional black eye. But you notice that these mishaps are born with the same stubborn pride as any man's scraped knee. The village healer tends them with a knowing smile, sometimes muttering that the women take more care than the men anyway. At the feast after the game, stories swirl and laughter fills the air. Someone starts a song and the verses quickly grow ridiculous. Here's to the girl with the muddy braid, who outran the butcher and never was afraid. The refrain is picked up by everyone, the song rising over the clatter of mugs and the thump of boots. You linger by the fire, feeling the day's energy settle into your bones. The line between male and female, player and watcher, winner and loser, all of it seems blurred, irrelevant, replaced by a sense of shared experience. For tonight at least, everyone is a part of the story. As the night deepens, you wander outside. In the shadows, a group of girls passes the ball between them, practicing tricks in the moonlight. They pause to wave you over, grinning, then race away in a flurry of laughter. You realise that these impromptu lessons, the skills passed from sister to sister, mother to daughter, are just as important as the raucous matches that fill the square. They are the quiet foundation on which tomorrow's legends will be built. Back inside the tavern, as the last embers fade and sleepiness steals over the crowd, you hear someone raise a final toast. To all who played, to all who dared, and to the next game, may it be just as wild. The cheer is universal. Tonight, as every night the ball game is played, the village is united, not by victory or defeat, but by the joy of the chase, the thrill of the unexpected, and the bonds forged in mud and laughter. The last echoes of laughter ripple away as the night grows deep, and yet in the corners of the village square and the darkened fields beyond, life still pulses with energy. You sense that the medieval ball game was never just a game. It was a ritual, woven with meanings as old as the stones beneath your feet. Even now, as you let your mind drift on the edge of sleep, you catch snatches of songs, stories and prayers, reminders of how closely soccer's chaos was tied to the calendar, the saints, and the spirit of the people. You've heard the stories whispered by the fire and sung in the tavern. Ball games played not just for fun, but in honour of saints' days, festivals and ancient rituals. In many villages, the year's rhythm was measured out by holy days and feast days, and almost all of them, it seems, were excuses to gather, feast, and fling a battered ball across the muddy green. Tonight is Candlemas, and the church bells still echo faintly. In the morning, the whole village will shuffle to mass, lighting candles against the darkness and asking for blessings on the crops and homes. But tonight, well, tonight the holy and the unruly meet in the raucous festival of the ball game. You stand outside the church watching the last knots of players wander away, some still carrying the marks of the match. Muddy footprints lead all the way up to the ancient oak door, where, earlier, a priest had blessed the ball with a quick prayer and a little shake of holy water. It's an old tradition, equal parts solemn and mischievous, the villagers barely restraining their laughter as the priest muttered blessings, secretly hoping for a win for his own side. Historians still argue whether these sacred beginnings were meant to keep the games under control or simply to appease the saints, whose statues watched in silent judgment from the niches above. Some suggest that the blessing was a clever bit of social engineering, an effort to keep the chaos from boiling over. Others argue it was a genuine invocation of divine protection, a way to sanctify the wildness and make room for it in the rhythm of the year. You see, in the Middle Ages the line between sacred and secular was never clear. The same hands that folded in prayer also threw themselves into the scrum. On Shrove Tuesday, when the air fills with the scent of pancakes and the church bells ring in Lent, the ball game is a kind of farewell to pleasure, a wild letting go before the season of fasting begins. ashes to ashes, mud to mud, an old saying goes. In the chaos of the game, the village releases its burdens, clearing the way for quieter days ahead. You remember hearing that, in some regions, it was forbidden to play ball games during Lent. In others, the ban was flouted openly, with games springing up just out of sight of the church or town hall. There are stories of priests joining in, cassocks flying, as eager to score a goal as anyone else. Other times the clergy watched from the sidelines, wincing as a well-aimed ball nearly shattered the stained glass. In some places, certain saints became unofficial patrons of the game. St. Hugh, St. Blaise and St. Valentine are all named in old records as protectors of players, invoked for strong legs and quick recoveries from bruises. It's said that in one Devonshire village, the winning team would process to the churchyard, ball in hand, and offer thanks at the shrine of their chosen saint, leaving the ball as a votive, or, more likely, sneaking it out for the next match. You can imagine the scene: villagers, mud-splattered and breathless, crowding into the cool stone church, laughter and prayers mingling in the incense-laden air, the ball, sometimes nothing more than a bundle of rags, placed reverently at the altar, or even tossed up on the rood screen where it would stay until the next year's game. Some old churches still have mysterious ball marks on their wooden doors, or carvings of the game in hidden corners, a secret language for those who know where to look. The ball game, at its heart, was both celebration and supplication. It was a plea for luck, a shout of thanks, a way to honour the saints and ask their blessing for the months ahead. Some games marked the end of winter, a prayer for warmth and growth. Others were part of May Day revels. The ball tossed through blossoming branches as young men and women wove new legends in the green. You catch another glimpse of this sacred mischief in the old customs, the singing of psalms before the first kick, the procession around the village green, the local wise woman marking players' faces with ash or flour to keep away evil spirits and fowls, she'd cackle. If the ball was lost or burst, the game was stopped for a moment's silence. Sometimes a prayer, sometimes a superstitious pause to ward off bad luck. Not everyone approved. In some years, especially when tempers flared or a window shattered, the clergy would thunder from the pulpit against the riotous sport, warning of punishments divine and earthly alike. "This is no way to honour the saints," one preacher wrote in exasperation. But the villagers, you notice, were rarely convinced. As soon as the sermon ended, the game resumed. Perhaps a bit further from the church, but just as fierce. It wasn't just about honouring the saints, though. The bull game often followed the agricultural calendar as much as the religious one. After the first ploughing, before the hay harvest, after the grain was brought in, these were all natural times for the village to come together, to celebrate, to blow off steam and settle old grudges with mud and laughter. For many, the wild chase of the ball was as much a ritual as the planting of seeds or the ringing of the church bell. There are stories, too, of miracle matches. One year, a terrible drought threatened the harvest, and the villagers played a ball game for rain, promising to donate the first coin found in the mud to the church if the heavens opened. By nightfall, the sky had darkened and a gentle rain began to fall. "The saints must love the game as much as we do," an old farmer said, grinning, and the tradition was kept for generations. You can see, then, why these games meant so much. The chaos of the ball game was a release, yes, but it was also a way to stitch the sacred into daily life, to remind everyone that even the wildest play had a place in the pattern of the world. The feast after the game is part of the ritual too. As the players gather in the candlelit tavern, the first toast is always to the saints, the second to the village, and the third, rowdiest of all, to the ball itself. Songs and stories fill the air. There are prayers for absent friends, for the year's harvest, for forgiveness, if needed, for any trouble caused by the day's excesses. It isn't all reverence and ritual, of course. The jokes and playful blasphemies bubble up. St. Valentine, give me swifter feet next year. But always with a sense of the sacred close by. If the match was especially fierce, someone might propose a moment of silence for lost boots, broken windows, or even the battered ball, now hanging in tatters from the tavern rafters. You find yourself thinking how much these games were a form of communal magic, a chance to mix the profane and the holy, the laughter and the longing, the mud and the mystery. It's as if, for a few precious hours, the village remembers what it is to be both wild and whole, part of the world, but also reaching for something beyond it. Even now, as you leave the circle of firelight and walk through the quiet streets, you feel the lingering power of the game. The saints' statues watch from their alcoves, the moonlight gleaming on weathered stone. Somewhere a dog barks, and you hear a snatch of song. Bless us, ball, for another year, and keep the game alive. Historians still search for the exact meanings of these rituals. Were they meant to bind the community, to invite the blessing of the divine, or simply to give everyone a reason to come together and play? The truth you suspect is as tangled as the game itself, a blend of memory, faith, and the unstoppable need to gather, shout, and chase something round across the grass. So as the village drifts into sleep, the echoes of the ball game linger, a blessing, a memory, a promise that, come the next feast day, the game and the joy will return. You awaken the next morning to the golden hush of dawn and the soft, satisfied ache of a village well played. There's a warmth in the air, not just from the fires rekindled or the pies baking for breakfast, but from the lingering afterglow of yesterday's wild, glorious mayhem. For all its bruises and confusion, last night's ball game did more than bring the village together. It nudged people closer, made neighbours out of rivals, and for more than a few sparked something subtler than simple competition. As you stroll along the main lane, the signs of the previous day's match are everywhere. Muddy footprints trampled in every direction, a stray ribbon from someone's hair snagged on a fence post, the battered, deflated ball perched in the tavern window like a trophy. Children replay their favourite moments with sticks and pebbles, mimicking the wild scrambles and triumphant shouts, while grown-ups swap knowing smiles and slightly exaggerated stories. Did you see the way Mary darted past all three Millers? Aye, but Tom the Tanner nearly had her at the end, if not for that chicken. Yet beneath all this banter, you catch glimpses of another layer, a quieter dance running alongside the brawls and the bruises. Because in truth, the ball game has always been more than a contest. For centuries it's been a pretext, a stage, even a matchmaking ritual, bringing together those who might otherwise keep their distance. Beneath the elbows and flying mud, friendships are forged, old resentments fade, new alliances are sparked, sometimes in the form of a shared joke, sometimes with a look held a moment longer than the game required. You remember watching two young people, barely more than children, who found themselves tumbling together after a fierce scramble for the ball. At first, their laughter was shy, almost embarrassed. But as the match wore on, you noticed them glancing at each other, sharing smiles during breaks, and by the time the feast rolled around, they'd found their way to the same bench, plates touching, heads bent together. Later, as the music played and candles flickered low, they slipped away into the shadows, the start of a new story whispered in the wake of the old. Historians still debate how central this matchmaking element was to the medieval ball game. Some claim the romance is just a side effect, a happy accident of shared chaos and adrenaline. Others argue that the village elders encouraged the games precisely because of their power to shuffle the social deck, to create chances for alliances, friendships, even marriages, especially in communities where people's lives otherwise moved along strict, well-worn paths. You hear of places where, after the match, eligible bachelors and maidens were expected to share a dance or a song, or to serve ale side by side at the victory feast. In some regions, the winning team's captain was given the right to ask any unmarried participant to walk home together, or to share the first dance at the next festival. These traditions, half serious and half playful, softened the boundaries of class and custom just enough to let new connections form. It wasn't all about romance, of course. The ball game was a way for rivals to shake hands, for feuding families to shout themselves hoarse together, and, in the aftermath, perhaps find their tempers cooled. If two young men who'd glared daggers at each other in the tavern could be seen, after a hard tackle, pulling each other out of the mud and laughing, The village elders nodded in approval. For all the shouts and mock threats, the game had a way of settling scores and smoothing out old wounds. You overhear an older woman, her eyes bright, her hands busy with the morning's bread, chuckling about how she met her man during a Shrove Tuesday match. "He tried to take the ball from me and I knocked him flat," she says to general laughter. "He got up, dusted himself off and asked if I'd share my pie with him. I figured any man who could take a tumble and still be polite was worth a second look." There are stories too of the games being used quite deliberately to bring about matches. Parents might nudge their children toward the field, keeping a keen eye on who paired off during the scuffles and who lingered in the shadows after dark. The wise women of the village, half mocking and half serious, would whisper, "Watch the ball if you want, but watch the ones who chase it closer." Sometimes a glance exchanged during the scramble was more important than a goal scored, and more lasting too. The open, rowdy chaos of the game was a space where shyness could dissolve, and words, usually so formal and rehearsed, gave way to laughter and shared exertion. For those too reserved to speak their feelings aloud, a well-timed pass or a helping hand offered after a tumble became a language all its own. In a world where love was often negotiated as much as felt, the freedom of the ball game was a rare, precious thing. You pass by the village well and find a group of girls clustered together, giggling about who ran fastest or who was caught the most times by a certain curly-haired baker's son. "He let me score, I swear it," one of them insists, to peals of laughter and a round of gentle teasing. A nearby boy, pretending not to listen, blushes furiously. His friends nudge him, and in a flash the chase begins again. One more game, one more round of muddy flirtation before chores call everyone home. There are less happy stories too, moments when the high spirits of the match turned sour, or when a playful tackle was taken the wrong way. But the wisdom of the elders usually prevailed, the atmosphere of the match lending itself to forgiveness and good humour. More than once you see two recent enemies thump each other's backs at the feast, the earlier squabble forgotten in the flood of ale, and the retelling of wilder exploits. You notice how the ball game acts as a kind of communal stage, magnifying the personalities and quirks of everyone involved. The shy become bold, the brash are tempered by good-natured jeers, the lonely find a circle of warmth and laughter that endures long after the bruises fade. The game's lack of structure and strict teams means that alliances shift constantly. A chase through the mud, a stolen ball, a sudden rescue, so that no one is left out for long. This shifting, inclusive energy weaves through every layer of the village. Children chase and dodge among the older players, learning from the experienced, finding their confidence. The elders watch with satisfaction, their advice half teasing, half earnest. Even those who cannot play, whether from age, injury or shyness, are drawn in, called to serve as judges, storytellers, or the keepers of the battered ball between games. There is an old superstition you hear, that if two people touch the ball at the exact same time as it crosses the goal, their fates will be bound for a year. Whether anyone believes it or not, you notice a few hopeful glances exchanged as the ball nears its mark. One mother teases her daughter, "Careful, if you keep scoring with that boy, you'll be wed by Michaelmas." The daughter rolls her eyes but can't quite hide her smile. Historians still debate whether these rituals were real or imagined, formal or just the wishful thinking of romantic storytellers. Maybe it doesn't matter. What's clear, as you watch the villagers gather for breakfast, is that the ball game brings people together in ways no other event can. In a world shaped by hard work, long winters and strict customs, it's a precious chance to upend the usual order, to let laughter and luck run wild and to create the bonds that make a village a home. As the sun climbs higher, the square fills with plans for the next game. Who will play? Who will keep score? Who perhaps will find themselves on the same team as a secret crush, a new friend or an old rival? You sense the subtle hope in the air, the promise of another chance for luck, laughter, and maybe even love. Later, as the village goes about its work, the stories will continue, of missed goals, spectacular tumbles and sly glances. The game, like all the best rituals, lingers long after it ends, its magic working quietly in the lives it touched. And as you head home, content and just a little wistful, you think of all the hearts nudged a little closer by the wild joy of the match. Tomorrow, life will return to its steady pace, but for now the memory of the game is enough, a reminder that, in this place, even chaos can lead to connection, and a single battered ball can change the course of 100 stories. The village stirs to life with the golden haze of morning, and as you watch, you realise the game's legacy stretches far beyond your little square. Ball games, call them soccer, football, la soule, calcio, echo through the towns and cities of Europe. Each region, each country spins its own chaotic version, and you catch the flavour of their differences as easily as the scent of bread and smoke in the breeze. As the smithy's bell rings, you overhear two travellers arguing about the best way to play, each certain his home village's rules are the only sensible ones. The Englishman swears by wild mob football that turns entire towns into playing fields, while the Frenchman brags about the strategy and cunning needed for la soule in Normandy. You wonder how much of this is true, and how much is just the bragging of homesick men, but their rivalry is good-natured, and you realise this endless debate has always been part of the game. The crowd that played last night is smaller now, many off to their chores or nursing sore limbs, but a few diehards have gathered by the tavern to share stories. Someone asks, "How do they play in Florence?" And a merchant, quick with his hands and quicker with his stories, begins to describe Calcio Fiorentino, the bruising game from Italy. 50 men on each team, he claims, eyes wide, and not a one afraid of a little blood. The crowd laughs, shaking their heads. Even in a village used to chaos, this sounds like something from a fever dream. Yet you've heard the rumours. Calcio Fiorentino, played every June in the Grand Piazza, is part festival, part riot, and all spectacle. Players wear bright sashes and fight as much as they kick. Punches and grappling are not only allowed, they're expected. The game is bound to feast days, just like in your own village, and afterward the teams parade through the city, battered but jubilant. The rich and the poor, the young and the old, all share the madness for a few hours, then return, with sore muscles and fresh stories, to their daily lives. Historians still argue whether Calcio Fiorentino influenced the English game, or whether both grew out of an even older tradition. Some point to the Roman harpastum, a rough-and-tumble contest played by soldiers centuries before. Maybe the idea was never new. Maybe it's just something people do, wherever they have space, a ball, and a craving for wildness. You find yourself drawn into these cross-border tales, each more unbelievable than the last. In Brittany, they say, the ball is as big as a barrel and carried through the streets from parish to parish, hundreds joining in, the whole town swept up in a tide of shouts and banners. In Scotland, games rage through ancient towns like Kirkwall, with teams named for the Uppies and Doonies, the entire match a sprawling battle that can last from noon till dark. The rules, if they exist at all, are shaped by custom, geography, and the whims of each community. In France, La Soule is notorious for sprawling across fields, ditches, streams, and streets. One moment a foot race, the next a wrestling match. The ball itself sometimes lost for hours. The winning side earns not just bragging rights, but sometimes a round of drinks, a side of pork, or the chance to name the next feast day's queen. You overhear tales of the Scottish Bay game where the boundaries are the old town gates or the sea wall, and the only way to win is to carry or kick the ball over the goal before you're mobbed by the other side. The players, sometimes 100 strong, sometimes more, wear their working clothes or whatever they can find and play through mud, icy water, and over rough stone. There's a legend that the bay is never washed for luck and passed from generation to generation like a sacred heirloom. The variety is dizzying. In Cornwall, hurling is played with a silver ball, chased from one village to the next through farm fields and across streams. In Spain, old forms of pelota and other ball games are tied to holy days, sometimes played with sticks, sometimes by hand. You even hear a whisper of games from as far as Iceland and the Faroe Islands, where men and women chase balls across rocky ground, dodging sheep and each other. Sometimes the differences spark arguments, whose game is rougher, whose crowd rowdier, whose goals more absurd. But always, beneath the boasts, there's a mutual recognition. This is a tradition shared across borders, a wild beating heart at the centre of so many towns. The laughter, the bruises, the sense of belonging, these are the threads that bind the games together, even as the details spin off in 100 different directions. You think back to the traveller's boasts and wonder if, somewhere, a French peasant is telling his own story of an English village, shaking his head at their madness just as your friends here do. Or maybe an Italian merchant passing through with silk and spices brings news of Florence's festival, his words painting a picture as wild as any in your memory. In quieter moments you catch the elders comparing the old days to the new, lamenting that the games now are softer, the crowds smaller, the rules creeping in. Yet the children, already organising their own impromptu match in the lane, prove that the spirit endures. A ball, a handful of friends, and the world is suddenly a playing field again. Boundaries redrawn, rivalries invented and discarded, laughter echoing off stone and wood. The legacy of these games isn't just local pride, but the way they knit together people from every walk of life. A wandering mason, a merchant passing through, a sailor home from sea, all are welcome to join. The only requirement a willingness to leap in and learn as you go. Newcomers are taught the rules, or more often told there aren't any, and to keep their wits about them. Some games carry echoes of the great tournaments and chivalric ideals sung about in the halls of lords and kings. In Italy, there are stories of noblemen joining the games alongside peasants, forgetting rank for a day as mud and sweat erase all difference. In the English villages, lords may look on with mild amusement or horror, sometimes trying to ban the games, sometimes offering prizes for the best play, a new hat, a pair of gloves, or more rarely a silver coin. You realise that this is more than mere sport. It's a language spoken across borders, a kind of living memory passed from generation to generation. It links the farmer in his muddy boots to the merchant in his silks, the young girl dodging through the scrum to the wise woman keeping score from her stoop. Historians still puzzle over how much the various versions of the game influenced each other. Did the rough games of the English countryside shape the elegant football that would one day sweep the globe? Did the wrestling matches of Florence leave their mark on today's rules? Or are all these games just branches from the same wild, ancient tree, born of a need to gather, to celebrate, to compete, and to connect? For now, the arguments don't matter. The game, whatever its name, whatever its rules, lives on wherever people gather. You watch as the sun rises higher, the square filling with laughter, and you know the next match is only ever a heartbeat away. The battered ball from last night's game sits by the door, patched and ready, a silent invitation for the next round of chaos. Children chase after it, their shouts rising like birdsong, and you sense that, centuries from now, someone will still be telling the story, of mud and laughter, of rivalry and unity, of a game that never quite made sense but always made a village feel like home. The world of medieval soccer, you soon realise, was never only about the ball, or even the rules, or the bruises. Often it was just as much about the thrill of breaking rules altogether. In villages where daily life was rigid and expectations well worn, the forbidden joy of a banned game brought a new, delicious flavour to the contest. Even after royal proclamations and local decrees, you sense the persistent heartbeat of rebellion in the way people gather in alleyways and meadows, eyes darting for a sign of the law, hearts quickening with anticipation. After all, who could resist the lure of forbidden fun? There's something undeniably sweet about sneaking out to play, the threat of punishment hanging in the air. This edge, this tension, is woven deep into the memories and stories of generations. You hear it in every whispered plan and shared grin. They said we couldn't play, so we did. You walk past the church gate and overhear a group of boys plotting, half joking and half serious, about the secret match they'll play after dark. The match will be quick, maybe only a few wild minutes before someone's lantern flares and the cry goes up. The bailiff's coming. In an instant the ball is hidden under a cloak. The crowd scatters, and laughter peals through the alleys. Even the youngest learn the thrill of outwitting authority. It's no secret that for centuries, medieval rulers, kings, mayors, bishops, viewed ball games with deep suspicion. Disruptive, they called them, and dangerous. Too many broken windows, too many bruised egos, too much time lost from useful labour or archery practice. The records are filled with proclamations. Edward II's famous 1314 ban on football in London, Edward III's similar decree, even Henry VIII's attempts to restrict idle games. The message is always the same. Order must prevail, and the game, with its wild energy, is a threat to that order. Historians still argue whether these bans had any real effect, or whether, as the villagers love to claim, they just made the game more exciting. There's no doubt the bans gave rise to a new tradition, the forbidden match, played in defiance, with lookouts posted at every corner. The thrill of evasion became part of the sport's very soul. Some stories tell of games played in the dead of night, with only the moon for witness. In others, the field shifts constantly as word spreads that the reeve is near, the whole village working together to keep the game hidden, grandmothers, children, even the local priest sometimes playing their part. There are tales of balls disguised as bundles of laundry or loaves of bread, smuggled past suspicious constables with a wink and a prayer. Occasionally the punishments were real. A few unlucky souls found themselves in the stocks, or fined a week's wages. But these penalties, rather than discouraging the games, seem only to have increased their allure. If someone was caught, the village made a hero of him, the one who stood up for the game. Songs were sung, and the next match played in his honour. One of the village elders recounts how, as a boy, he joined a midnight game behind the old mill. The match was frantic, the ball constantly threatened by discovery, and in the end the bailiff did appear, waving his staff and promising trouble. "We scattered, of course," the old man laughs, "but not before I got in the winning goal. Best match I ever played." The memory, decades old, still glows with pride and a hint of rebellion. Sometimes the opposition wasn't just from the authorities. There were villagers who objected on moral or practical grounds, those who saw the damage to crops or feared the game would tempt the young to vice and idleness. You overhear a shopkeeper grumbling that no good comes from all this chasing and shouting. But even he can't hide a smile as the children play at his doorstep, their joy infectious. There's a sort of honour among those who play forbidden games. Codes are whispered from elder to apprentice, never betray where the next match will be, always warn the slowest when trouble is near, share the ball, share the risk, share the victory. In the face of authority there's a fierce camaraderie, a pride in defying the odds, in making space for chaos where order threatens to suffocate. You notice that these rebellious matches often bring the whole village together in a strange kind of unity. For one night, old grudges are set aside, and even the most proper townsfolk find themselves rooting for the underdog. The forbidden match becomes a shared secret, a wink and a nod passed from one to another, a reminder that, beneath the rules, the spirit of play endures. You think of a story told every year at the winter feast, how one rainy March the Lord's men confiscated every ball in the parish, or so they thought. The next day, as the lords rode out, they found themselves pelted with apples, bundles of rags, and even a roasted turnip, as the village children invented new balls on the spot. The game, it seems, can never truly be banned. It just changes shape, finding loopholes and laughter in every law. Sometimes the forbidden game takes on a kind of sacredness, as if the act of rebellion is itself a prayer for freedom. After all, what is play but a way to carve out space for joy in a world of work and worry? The medieval villagers understand this instinctively. You see it in their eyes, the way they guard the battered ball, the pride with which they pass down stories of matches played under threat. Historians sometimes argue over how much real danger there was. Were the bailiffs truly out for blood, or just keeping up appearances? Did the church really hate the games, or only when things got out of hand? The records are mixed. Some show severe punishments, others only token fines. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Enough risk to make the game thrilling, enough leniency to let it survive. Over time, some towns made their peace with the games, setting aside certain days for play, letting the chaos unfold in a controlled burst. But even then, the memory of the forbidden match lingered. The wildest cheers were reserved for the old-timers who remembered when the game was truly outlawed, when playing was not just fun, but an act of defiance. The forbidden matches left their mark in other ways too. Songs, jokes, even the design of the balls themselves sometimes reflect this rebellious spirit. There are balls with secret pockets for hiding messages, or painted with symbols to ward off bad luck, meaning of course unlucky encounters with the law. You walk back through the village square and see the battered ball perched proudly in the window, a silent testament to the night's triumph. Children play at your feet, inventing new rules and games, their laughter ringing clear. In their eyes you see the same spirit that filled last night's match, the thrill of doing something just a little bit dangerous, just a little bit free. As you head home, you realise that, in the end, the forbidden games aren't just about breaking rules. They're about reminding everyone that rules, too, are made by people, and sometimes, for the sake of joy and community, it's worth bending them. The legacy of medieval soccer isn't just a story of bruises or goals scored. It's a living memory of rebellion, laughter, and the wild, stubborn freedom that can never truly be banned. The taste of rebellion lingers long after the forbidden matches have ended, but soon the year rolls forward, and the village finds itself once more on the cusp of a feast day. Here, in the bustling heart of medieval life, soccer is reborn, not in secrecy, but in celebration. There's an electricity in the air, a sense that today the world has tilted on its axis, that something wild and joyful is about to erupt. For feast days, those sacred communal pauses in the hard work of the year, are the true home of the ball game. From early morning the preparations begin. Housewives dust flour from their hands and sneak glances out the window. Farmers, for once, find excuses to linger at the well. Children, too restless to help with chores, wander the lanes, eyes bright with anticipation. The air fills with scents of roasting meat, honey cakes, and the tang of newly poured ale. Banners flutter from windows. Church bells peal a little longer than usual. Feast days are special, you realise, not just for their rituals and processions, but for the way they momentarily unravel the threads of the ordinary. Everyone, high or low, old or young, pious or playful, finds their place in the swirl of colour and sound. Today, the ball game is neither banned nor hidden. It's woven into the day's events as tightly as the prayers and the music. The rules, as always, are fluid, but certain traditions persist. The game might begin after the last Mass, with the priest giving a blessing, not just for safety, but perhaps, you suspect, in hopes of keeping the chaos from spilling too far. In some villages, a ceremonial kick-off is performed by the oldest woman, or the youngest child, or the town's most recent bride or groom. In others, the ball is paraded through the streets with ribbons and flowers before the first wild kick sends it tumbling into the crowd. As you watch, you notice how the mood of the feast day game differs from the forbidden matches. There's still competition, and certainly no shortage of wild tackles and daring runs, but the undertone is one of revelry, not risk. The game becomes a kind of living theatre, with players performing for the crowd as much as for themselves. Spectators line the edges of the field, or the village green, or the muddy lane, or wherever the ball happens to roll, shouting encouragement, tossing jokes, even joining in when the mood strikes. You see families play together, mothers racing their sons, grandfathers teaming up with grandchildren, friends switching sides mid-game just for the pleasure of it. Rivalries flare, but they are gentle, softened by laughter and the shared understanding that, today at least, victory is secondary to spectacle. Historians still argue about the true origins of these feast day games. Some suggest they are relics of ancient pagan rites, long ago adapted to Christian festivals. Others see them as natural outgrowths of the human urge to play, to gather, to compete, and to celebrate. Whatever their roots, you sense that the game belongs to the day in a way nothing else does. It is both a release from the year's toil and a ritual affirmation of the community itself. You hear the old-timers recall legendary matches played on St. John's Day, or Michaelmas, or the feast of the village's patron saint. Do you remember the year the ball ended up in the vicar's stew pot? Or when the blacksmith scored by accident? Twice. The stories grow in the telling, embroidered with impossible goals, miraculous saves, and the kinds of comic mishaps that only happen when the whole village is watching. Today there's a particularly festive air. The ball is freshly made, a gift from the Tanners Guild and as round as any seen in living memory. The baker's daughter is first to kick it, sending it spinning toward the green. Instantly the crowd surges forward and the game is on. For a while, chaos reigns. The ball disappears under a pile of legs and arms, only to emerge near the pond, where it's intercepted by a pair of laughing twins. Children weave in and out of the scrum, older players take exaggerated tumbles for the crowd, and one enterprising dog manages to snatch the ball and lead half the field on a merry chase before being bribed with a sausage. You find yourself swept up in the noise, the colour, the unstoppable movement. At the edge of the field, musicians play lively tunes, their fiddles and drums adding rhythm to the action. A juggler tries to keep 3 apples aloft while dodging errant players. A cart festooned with ribbons serves drinks to thirsty competitors. The whole village is a stage, and the ball game is wild, unscripted dance. Yet even here, with all the joy, the game remains a crucible where old tensions and new friendships are tested. The ball becomes a prize, a symbol of honour for the day. Scuffles break out, and for a moment you worry tempers will flare, but then the laughter returns and the match rolls on. There are moments of pure theatre. A young woman, skirt flying, dribbles the ball past 3 opponents and scores to thunderous applause. An elderly man, cheered on by half the village, manages to intercept the ball and, after a comic struggle, passes it off to a shy apprentice who is promptly tackled by his friends. Every play is celebrated, every slip and tumble recounted in gleeful detail. At the heart of it all is a kind of magic, a suspension of everyday rules, a loosening of the bonds that usually tie everyone to their place. For the length of the match, the village is transformed, every player and spectator remade by the shared experience. Old enmities are forgotten, if only for an hour. The girl who argued with her mother yesterday now passes her the ball with a smile. The man who feuded with his neighbour over a fence dispute last autumn finds himself defending the same goal, side by side. You notice too how the game creates a space for shy or uncertain souls to shine. The crowd roars as a quiet boy, usually overlooked, manages a clever pass that leads to a goal. The women who might be ignored in the marketplace command the field with quick feet and sharper minds. For just a little while, everyone's story changes. As the sun dips and shadows lengthen, the game slows. The ball, now more oval than round, is kicked one last time. The crowd gathers, breathless, and the match ends not with a final score but with hugs, handshakes, and the promise of next year's game. The battered ball is lifted high, a trophy and a memory in one. The feast that follows is as much a part of the ritual as the game itself. Tables are laid end to end, loaded with bread, cheese, roast meat and cakes. Ale flows, songs rise and stories are told, every retelling making the day a little more legendary. If there were quarrels, they are left behind on the field. If there were romances, they blossom in the glow of firelight. Historians may argue over the meaning of these games, their origin, their purpose, but you see now what matters most. The way the feast day ball game weaves everyone together, turning the ordinary world upside down and giving each person, for a little while, a new role to play. As night falls and the last lanterns flicker out, the village drifts to sleep, the echoes of laughter and cheers settling into dreams. Tomorrow life will return to its patterns, the fields to plough, the bread to bake, the wood to chop. But something has shifted, new bonds formed, old wounds eased, and a memory planted that will carry everyone through the year until the ball rolls again. By morning, the aftermath of the feast day ball game is plain to see. The village green is streaked with footprints, tufts of grass torn where the scrum was thickest, ribbons and bits of bunting caught in hedges and trees. Everywhere you look, people wear the after effects of the match. Muddy hems, scuffed knees, a prideful limp here, a bruised arm there. But what's most striking, as you walk through the market square, is how little anyone cares about appearances. The marks of the game are worn openly, almost as badges of honour. You pause to watch the baker's daughter tie her shoe, the lace barely holding her battered slipper together. Her feet are bare and brown, toughened by years of running on earth and stone. A few other players have managed to keep their boots, those sturdy, worn leather shoes passed down or patched each winter. But most, it seems, played in whatever they could find or nothing at all. The equipment of medieval soccer is, in short, whatever happens to be at hand. There are no uniforms, no matching socks, not even a standard shoe or cap. One boy is proudly wearing an old felt hat that's 2 sizes too large, swaying comically with every step. Another girl has fastened her apron strings as a makeshift belt, and her skirt, now several shades darker than it was this morning, billows out with every sprint. It's not just the clothes either. The goalposts are simply landmarks. A stone wall, a church door, a barrel at the edge of the square. Sometimes the players tie a bit of string or ribbon to a tree to mark a turning point. But as the game shifts and the crowd moves, the boundaries dissolve almost completely. This is a sport shaped by landscape, by the practical needs and resources of the village. If you look closely, you'll see a few players have come prepared in their own way. One older man wears a heavy woolen cloak, hoping its thickness will soften the blows of the scrum. A girl wraps rags around her wrist for extra grip, while another ties her hair up with strips of cloth to keep it from blinding her mid-sprint. There's a strange beauty in the variety, a resourcefulness born of necessity. Historians still debate what, if anything, could be called a uniform in these early matches. Sometimes families or neighbourhoods pick a colour. Red ribbons for one side, blue sashes for another, but more often it's a riot of mismatched clothes. Old illustrations from the period show everything from tunics and hose to peasant dresses and baggy shirts, some with shoes, most without. The only constant, it seems, is the lack of constancy. There are tales, of course, of more organised matches where lords or guilds sponsor the game. On those occasions, players might be given special tokens, scarves, hats, or even badges bearing the symbol of their patron, but these are rare. In most villages, it's the everyday clothes that make the players. Whatever survived the winter, whatever could stand another round in the mud. The state of the ball itself is another matter entirely. Yesterday's game began with a nearly round, well-stitched bladder, but by dusk it had become a lumpy, sagging lump, half stuffed with straw and mended on the fly with a scrap of twine. No one complains. It bounces better this way, someone jokes, and everyone laughs. If a ball bursts, there's always another fashion in a hurry, a bundle of rags, an old sack, even a tightly knotted bundle of reeds in a pinch. Sometimes the ball is so soft it can barely be kicked. Other times it's so hard that a misjudged header will leave you dizzy. The unpredictability becomes part of the fun, an extra challenge for the players to adapt to on the fly. You notice the older children teaching the younger ones how to wrap rags around a ball of straw, how to stitch a split seam with a crooked needle. There's pride in making do, in using what's at hand. The ball is a shared project as much as a shared game, handed down, repaired and remade from one year to the next. Safety, you quickly learn, is more a matter of experience and wit than equipment. The wise step carefully on the uneven ground, keep their heads low in the roughest scrums, and look out for one another, most of the time. Bruises are inevitable, so are stubbed toes and the occasional lost fingernail. Yet for all the mishaps, there's remarkably little complaint. The pain, like the mud, is simply part of the game. There are occasional calls for change. An ambitious miller's son suggests, what if we all wore the same colour, like soldiers? But the idea is quickly laughed off. Then how would we know who to tackle? Someone shouts. The mismatched chaos, the riot of colour and invention, is as beloved as the game itself. You hear an old woman reminisce about a match played during a wedding feast, where the bride's veil became a makeshift flag, and the groom, having lost both shoes, played barefoot the rest of the day. The laughter that follows is not at the expense of the players, but in solidarity with them. Everyone understands the joy of improvisation, of finding freedom in the lack of perfection. Sometimes this lack of equipment becomes a point of pride, a way to prove one's toughness, or inventiveness, or belonging. "Only soft feet need shoes," boasts one boy, hopping on a bandaged toe. "You haven't really played until you've skinned a knee on the green," his friend chimes in. There's a shared understanding that what matters is not what you wear, but how you play. Of course, for some, the scarcity is a hardship. Not every child has shoes to lose or rags to spare. The village, however, usually finds a way to provide: an old pair of boots passed down, a shirt patched and repatched until it fits someone new. The spirit of sharing extends even to the ball. If someone's lost it or broken it, there's always a hand to help repair or replace it. The equipment may be meagre, but the generosity is not. At the end of the day, the battered clothes and makeshift balls are set aside, but the pride remains. The marks of the match, mud, bruises, ragged hems, are carried home as proof of participation, of courage, of belonging to something bigger than oneself. You hear a rumour that in some distant towns the game is slowly changing. New rules are appearing, new equipment, even talk of matching tunics and special shoes. Some shake their heads at this news. Too neat, they grumble, too much like the Lord's games, but others are curious. "Maybe next year we'll try it," says a girl, eyeing the rough remains of her slipper with a thoughtful smile. For now, though, the medieval ball game remains gloriously rough and real, a festival of invention, resilience, and shared delight. The mismatched clothes, the makeshift balls, the bare feet and battered shoes all are part of the story. Here, in this patch of muddy earth, the lack of equipment is not a failure but a badge. Proof that play belongs to everyone, no matter what they own. As the sun sets, children and adults alike gather around the fire, swapping stories and laughter, their clothes stained and spirits high. Tomorrow, the washing will be done and the shoes repaired, but tonight, the village basks in the satisfaction of another match survived, and, for a little while, the world feels beautifully, perfectly enough. As the days grow longer and the spring air sharpens with new warmth, the memory of the feast day game still lingers in the village. Yet beneath the laughter and stories there is a murmur, sometimes anxious, sometimes gleeful, about those games that didn't end with hugs and shared mugs of ale. Because as every seasoned player knows, medieval soccer can turn on a coin. One moment, it's a dance of joy and mud. The next, a match slips its leash and roars into outright riot. You hear the tales whispered by the old-timers around the well and retold, often with a glint of pride, at the tavern's hearth. There was the year the ball game spilled over into the market stalls, cabbages and apples smashed beneath running feet, a merchant's cart overturned and half the town's bread trampled into pulp. Or the infamous Candlemas match when the smithy's pig, already nervous from the crowd, bolted through the scrum, sending players and onlookers sprawling, igniting an argument that raged for days. There's something about the passion and physicality of the game that sometimes draws out the wildest parts of people. A harmless tackle becomes a grudge, a goal sparks a shouting match, and in a blink the energy of celebration sours into something sharper. It's not uncommon, you discover, for the line between sport and scuffle to blur until even the most enthusiastic fans hesitate, eyes darting between the action and the nearest escape. The village priest, wise from long years of tending both bodies and tempers, often stands ready with calming words, or, if needed, a sharp whistle. But not even he can always stem the tide when tempers flare. You watch a match erupt as two rival families, whose feud goes back to a borrowed plough and a disputed fence, clash at the edge of the green. At first, the crowd jeers, hoping for a quick resolution, but then cousins and neighbours wade in, and the scrum dissolves into a rolling riot. Historians still debate how common these outbursts really were. Some records insist that ball games sparked riots so often that they were a menace to peace. Others claim the violence is exaggerated, a memory grown larger with each retelling. Yet the village stories, for all their bluster, carry a certain truth. Where there is passion and pride, there is always the risk of chaos. One story, gleefully retold by every child in the village, concerns the Great Market Day Massacre, a name far grander than the facts. It started with a disputed goal and ended with a rain of turnips, an irate mayor, and a week-long ban on ball games. No one was truly hurt, but the tale grows wilder every year. Remember when old Bess knocked over the mayor's pie stall? Aye, and the scribe tried to keep score but lost his book in the mud. But not every riot is so easily laughed off. Sometimes real harm is done. Broken arms, lost teeth, even the rare but serious injuries that leave the village sober and subdued. In those cases, the aftermath is solemn. Apologies offered, feasts cancelled, the battered ball tucked away until tempers cool. The priest preaches on restraint and forgiveness, and the wise women hand out herbal remedies for bruises and sore heads. Yet, for all the risk, the game always returns. The riot becomes another story, a warning and a joke rolled into one. The lesson, repeated from parent to child, is that the joy of the game is found in its wildness, but that wildness must be tempered with care for one's neighbour. Some riots take on a mythic quality, remembered as the year of the 3-day game, or the Festival of Flying Shoes. You hear that once a match between two villages swelled so large that the crowd blocked the main road for hours, halting a passing lord and his retinue. The lord, amused rather than angry, watched the chaos and declared a prize for the winning team, though no one can quite agree which side actually won. There are towns, you learn, where local authorities have gone to extremes to keep the peace. In some places, teams are strictly limited, spectators kept at a distance, and matches played far from the market and church. Banners worn, no ball games within the town walls, and bailiffs watch with folded arms. Even then, though, the spirit of riot is never far beneath the surface. All it takes is a disputed call, a careless shove, and the field is once again alive with shouts, laughter, and the occasional flying shoe. You see too how the village responds when a game threatens to spiral out of control. The wise step in, elders, mothers, the village healer, arms folded, brows furrowed. Sometimes the players are separated, sent off to cool down, and sometimes the crowd is dispersed, everyone sent home with warnings and sighs. Yet within days the laughter returns, the match resumes, and the story of the riot is folded into the living memory of the village. For some, the risk of riot is part of the game's appeal. There's an old saying, you haven't really played until you've seen the game run wild. The possibility of disorder gives the match its edge, a sense of something larger and more unpredictable than a mere contest. It is perhaps the last place where the village can let loose, where all the pressures of daily life can be spent in a glorious, if sometimes dangerous, burst. You overhear a group of youths bragging about last year's wildest game. "We nearly lost the ball to the river," says one. "Only nearly," another teases. "That's nothing. My brother says he chased the ball all the way to the next parish." The laughter is full of pride and not a little mischief. Historians sometimes worry that these riots gave the game a bad name, fueling the bans and stern proclamations from church and state. Yet, as you watch the children chasing the ball down the lane, you see how the game survives. Adapted, retold, always a little more careful, but never quite tamed. Sometimes a village learns from the past. After a particularly rough year, the players agree on new ground rules. No tackles near the market stalls, no play after sundown, a timekeeper with a bell to end the match before tempers fray. Some grumble about the loss of real soccer, but most accept the change. After all, the game endures because it adapts, bending with the times but never breaking. There are towns where the riot is remembered fondly, a mark of community spirit, even resilience. "We survived the year of the black eye," boasts one elder, pointing to the craggy bridge. where the infamous brawl began, and will survive the next one too. As dusk settles, you see the villagers gathering again, drawn together by the promise of another match. This time the game is gentler, the rough edges softened by laughter, and a quiet understanding of limits. Still, there's an undercurrent of excitement, a memory of the chaos that always hovers just out of reach. You realise as you watch the play unfold that medieval soccer is more than a game. It is a mirror for the village, a space where the best and worst of the community can be aired, examined, and, more often than not, transformed. The riot, like the feast and the forbidden match, is part of the story, a wild chapter that gives meaning to the piece that follows. And so, with the last light fading, you drift homeward. The sound of the match, shouts, laughter, and the occasional scuffle, fading into the soft night air. Tomorrow the stories will grow wilder, the bruises will heal, and the village will carry on. But for now, the memory of the riot glimmers in the minds of all who played, a reminder of the thin line between order and wild joy. Morning comes again, softer this time, as though the village itself is taking a deep breath after all the storms and stories of feast days, riots, and forbidden matches. You walk the lanes in a gentle hush, feeling the world slowly come back to order. And yet the question hangs, was all this wild, joyful, dangerous chaos just a medieval memory? Or did something from these unruly games survive, echoing forward into the calm patterns of today's soccer and the other sports that fill city fields and television screens? It's a question the villagers themselves sometimes ponder, especially the oldest among them, who've seen rules begin to creep in, who remember the days when the only limit was the horizon. But it's also a debate that stirs in distant towns and the halls of scholars, in those thick history books that try to make sense of muddy legends. Did the chaos of medieval soccer give birth to the elegant precision of modern sport? Or did the two part ways, each a relic of its own time, its own spirit? Historians still argue about it, their voices weaving through centuries of dusty records and half-forgotten songs. Some say there's a direct line, that the chaos and joy of medieval soccer evolved, step by uneven step, into the regimented games of schools and colleges, into the codified rules of the Football Association in 1863, and the massive spectacles of today. Others see a break, an extinction. Those games, they insist, were something else, a folk ritual, a festival, a village storm. What we play now is only a distant cousin, shaped by a world that can no longer afford the mess and danger of its wild beginnings. But if you look closely, as you walk these medieval lanes, if you listen to the children playing with a makeshift ball, or to the elders recounting wild old matches, you'll catch a thread that hasn't quite snapped, a sense that beneath the structure and spectacle of modern sport something unruly still survives. The signs are there, hidden in plain sight. The ball, even when perfectly round and stitched in a factory, still carries the memory of pig's bladder and rag, of hands shaping something out of almost nothing. The goal, however gleaming and measured now, still echoes those wild, disputed finish lines. A church door here, a barrel there, whatever the players could agree on in the moment. And the spirit of the match, for all its referees and rules, still breaks free sometimes. A last-minute comeback, a furious argument, a muddy celebration. You overhear in the square an argument about the first soccer match. Some claim it was on the fields of Eton, or the public parks of Sheffield. Others, with a wink, say it began right here, when old Tom and young Mary first kicked a ball of straw across the green, and half the village gave chase. The truth, as always, is messier and richer than any one story. There are those who mourn the passing of the chaos, who miss the thrill of the unknown, the way a match could sweep up the whole village, the way a single kick might decide more than just a score. But others see hope in the way the game has endured, in its ability to adapt, to survive bans and boundaries, to slip from the hands of kings and into the parks and playgrounds of the world. You hear too the voices of the sceptical. That was never sport, says one old man, shaking his head. That was survival, that was festival, that was madness. What we play now, that's sport. But even he smiles as he says it, and you catch him later watching the children as they squabble over a handball and then forget their argument as quickly as it began. It's a strange thing. The more the game changes, the more it remains a place where joy and chaos can meet, where communities can gather, where old stories are retold and new ones begun. Some say the biggest loss is not the lack of bruises or the end of riotous matches, but the way the game has become less about the whole village and more about teams and fans and leagues. Yet even now, on a quiet day, a handful of neighbours will come together, and for a little while the field becomes a stage for something older and wilder. Scholars continue to hunt for proof. Old court records, church decrees, scraps of letters, and faded paintings, trying to piece together a direct lineage from medieval madness to modern match. Some point to Cambridge rules and the public school leagues, the written codes that finally gave the sport its modern shape. Others trace the rituals, the feast day games, the community pride, and see in today's fans and their songs the echo of ancient celebrations. One historian writes that the old game died so that the new might be born. Another insists it never died, it just put on new clothes. Both are true in a way. If you close your eyes and listen to the noise of a modern stadium, you might catch beneath the roar the ghosts of 1,000 muddy feet, the laughter and shouts of those who played with nothing but hope and a battered ball. In villages like this one, the stories keep the memory alive. The children still chase balls down the lane, mothers still shake their heads and patch-torn shirts, old men still boast of the day they scored the winning goal, or started the wildest riot. Each retelling smooths the edges, but never quite polishes away the grit. And on certain days, when the sun is high and the chores are few, the old game returns, not as a relic, but as a living thing. You see it in the shared glance before the kickoff, in the sly grin of the player who forgets the rules, in the hug at the end of the match, bruises and all. The game, it turns out, is bigger than any rulebook, any field, any era. It is a living story, and every match, old or new, is a fresh chapter. As the evening settles over the village, you walk one last time across the green. You find a group of young people, shirt sleeves rolled, arguing over the day's match. It was over the line. No, it wasn't. Let's just play another round. And so they do, their laughter ringing out as the ball rolls away, as if it has a mind of its own, eager for more. Historians still debate the question, and probably always will. Was medieval soccer the ancestor of today's beautiful game, or did it vanish into myth and memory, leaving only its spirit behind? For those who lived it, the answer hardly matters. What counts is the feeling, the freedom, the wildness, the sense that for a little while anything is possible and everyone belongs. In that sense, maybe nothing truly goes extinct. Maybe the chaos just changes form, slips through the cracks, and waits for the next muddy field, the next village feast, the next group of friends with nothing but a ball and a hunger for something unpredictable. Maybe, in every goal scored and every argument settled with a laugh, the spirit of medieval soccer lives on. And as the stars rise and the village quiets, you realise you've witnessed not just a story of games and goals, but a story of people, resilient, playful, stubborn, and always ready for one more match, one more adventure, one more joyful, unpredictable run down the field. Night falls gently on the village, the sky deepening to blue velvet as lanterns flicker in the windows, and the air cools with the promise of dew. You wander once more along the lanes and greens where, not so long ago, shouts and laughter tumbled like the ball itself. Now the hush feels earned. The wild game is over, but the story lingers, woven into every rut and muddy patch, in the proud limps and the sleepy smiles of the players, in the battered ball waiting by the hearth for its next adventure. What, you wonder, has medieval soccer left behind? How did all this chaos, rebellion and community magic become the organised global passion it is today? You walk quietly through these questions, listening to the echoes of the village, a tapestry of memories, warnings, and wonder. You see the legacy not just in the rules and rituals, but in the hidden lessons. For all its wildness, the old game taught the village how to be a community. It taught the quick to help the fallen, the bold to find restraint, the fearful to step forward, if only for a moment. It reminded the proudest and the most humble alike that victory is fleeting, but the story is forever. It forced laughter from sorrow and peacemaking from riot. You pause by the tavern, its door thrown open to welcome a few last stragglers home. Inside, the battered ball sits on the mantel, a silent relic of the day's mischief and glory. You hear the faint song of an old ballad, something about a game so wild it turned the river backwards and the stars upside down. The children beg for one more story, and the elders, so often stern, smile and oblige. What did the world inherit from these unruly matches? Surely you see it in the way modern soccer and other sports organise teams, make rules and share celebrations with feasts and song. You hear it in the language of fans who still call their best matches legends, their victories miracles, and their rivals old foes. You see it in every muddy Sunday league, every pickup game in a city park, every battered pair of shoes running after a ball on dusty streets in 100 countries. But the deeper legacy is more subtle. It is the spirit of the game, the willingness to improvise, to share, to forgive, to laugh at mishaps and play through adversity. Medieval soccer was never only about winning or losing. It was about the sheer delight of not knowing what might happen next. It was about the invitation, spoken or unspoken, to belong, to try, to be part of the story, no matter your age or skill or station. You remember the oddest bits too, the jokes that became tradition, the quirky wisdom passed down by players who'd spent a lifetime bruising shins and egos, like the shoeless rule, only the fastest feet go bare, or the saying that every great ball game needs a good pig, a bad referee and 3 angry mothers, or that if the ball doesn't break by sundown, you haven't played hard enough. Historians still debate whether the chaos of medieval soccer made possible the order of modern sport, or whether it survived in spite of it. Perhaps it's both. Maybe the wildness was always destined to be tamed, so the joy could spread to more people, more safely, in more places. Or maybe the rules and boundaries are just a thin veneer, and underneath, the old chaos is waiting, ready to break free in every unexpected bounce, every last-minute goal, every crowd that loses itself in laughter. You see this in the way the stories are told, never quite the same twice, always embroidered with a new twist or a half-remembered joke. The facts don't matter so much as the feeling, the sense of possibility, the hint of anarchy, the certainty that, even in the quietest village, magic might break out at any moment. That spirit, you sense, is the true inheritance of medieval soccer. The world has changed so much since those first wild matches, but people are much the same. They still long for connection, for joy, for something to lift them out of the everyday. They still gather to play, to watch, to cheer, and to remember. And in the heart of every game, there's still that flash of wildness, an echo of the days when the whole village chased a ball across the fields, the future uncertain, the present alive with the roar of community. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you let these memories settle around you. You hear the soft creak of wagon wheels on the lane, the last laugh echoing from the green, the hush of the village wrapping you close. Maybe in dreams you'll play one more match, racing barefoot through the dusk, feeling the old world rush up around you, wild and wonderful and free. Because that is the real legacy of medieval soccer. Not just a game, but a spirit that refuses to die. A story that waits, always, for one more run, one more laugh, one more impossible goal. And maybe, as you drift off, you feel it. The gentle tug of the game calling you home. So now, as the night settles deep and your breath grows softer, let the echoes of the medieval ball game slip quietly from your mind. Picture the lanterns fading, the voices dwindling to a gentle hum, the muddy fields empty and peaceful under the silver glow of the moon. You've journeyed through centuries tonight, walked muddy lanes and felt the wild rhythm of ancient feet, tasted the air of feast days and the hush after riot. Let those stories dissolve now into the warmth of your pillow, your body light, your thoughts gentle as falling leaves. Every match, every wild run, every burst of laughter, all of it fades to stillness, a gentle peace that wraps you safe and warm. The bull waits quietly by the hearth for tomorrow's dreams, and the village, content at last, drifts into the calm of sleep. Let your shoulders relax, let your thoughts loosen, and allow yourself to slip softly into rest, carrying with you only the quiet joy of having shared this timeless, wonderful chaos. The story goes on, always, but tonight you can simply rest, knowing that in some small way you're part of that never-ending game. Good night, traveller. May your sleep be deep and your dreams as sweet and free as a moonlit run across the green. You're never alone on this journey. There is always a story waiting, always a game beginning, somewhere out there, just beyond the edges of sleep. Sweet dreams.